Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. As you can probably guess from the change in scenery behind me, I'm home for my vacation now. It was a wonderful week, had a great time, but very glad to be back and very glad to be telling you about all those books I read that I planned on reading. If you watched my reading vlog, I think it came out last week now, you'll know that I wasn't really up to much while there other than just reading books and having a very relaxing time. So let's get into how many I actually read and what I thought about them. I actually got through a lot of the books that I had on my TBR. I was, I think, pretty optimistic. I set 10 books on my TBR, which if you didn't see the video I made about that, you can click the link in the corner and check that out if you want to know what I thought about these books before I actually read them. And in the end, I got through 7 of those. So I think that's a pretty good job. I was away for, I think it was 7 days, but one of those I spent a lot of time cleaning. So really I got a lot of reading. It was about a book a day for the vacation. And I think I picked good ones because I didn't have any did not finish books and I liked all of them to different degrees. Some of them were better than others, I think, but there was none that I was like, oh, I regret reading that. So that was good. And I guess without further ado, let me get into the actual wrap up. The first book I read was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, which I really wanted to read, but also I had a feeling it might be pretty dark. So I kind of wanted to read it early in my vacation. Not get it over with, but like, yeah, I wanted to read it. If it was really dark, I could read a really fun book afterwards and move on. But I really liked it. It was dark. It wasn't, you know, a happy-go-lucky type book. Some pretty horrible things happen, but I really enjoyed it. And something I actually really liked about it is the big event, the thing that sets off the whole story or the main tragedy of the book happens within the first few pages. So I started reading it and like 5 or 10 pages in, maybe even less than that. It was really soon. I'm not going to spoil it for people who might not have read it, but yeah, something is going to happen and you're told what that thing is. And then the rest of the book isn't so much a story or a sequence of events as it is exploring all of the characters that are involved in this situation. And, you know, there's whole sections where we flip back to 20, 30 years ago when someone who's an adult in the main story is a child and we explore their childhood and how they became the adult that they are. And I found that really interesting. It wasn't just a narrative about a thing, but just more exploring the situation in which this thing happened and how the different people became who they are and how that shapes how they react to what happens. Something I found really interesting was how you can 100% imagine how the events of this book could form that backstory if the characters who are children in The Bluest Eye were adults in another book and she was exploring their backstory. You can see how this whole event would just be a short explanation in their backstory, but she manages to blow it wide open and explore it from so many different ways and look at so many different people, and it was just really interesting. I really enjoyed it, and now, like I hoped when I talked about this in my TBR, I'm really excited to read more Toni Morrison and see her take on more different situations. So once I finished that, I was in the mood for sort of a palate cleanser, something a bit light, something fun. And so I read The Utterly Uninteresting and Unadventurous Tales of Fred the Vampire Accountant by Drew Hayes, which I didn't know what to expect going into this. I hadn't read much about it or heard any reviews or anything. And I'm not sure how I feel about it. It was fun. I enjoyed reading it. I'll probably pick up the rest of the series eventually. But it also wasn't amazing, and I feel like it didn't live up to its potential. Now, the part that I really liked was the whole world, the world building, the setting, the concept of, you know, supernatural creatures who live among us, but not in a brooding, dark from the shadows way, but just like, he drives a truck type way. He's an accountant. The vampire main, Fred, is not your classical vampire main. He's not brooding or sexy or super powerful or ancient. He's been a vampire for like 2 years and he's an accountant who was boring before he was a vampire and is still boring. That side I found really fun. I really enjoyed that. But I have sort of 2 main issues. The first is I wasn't sure about the structure of the book. Now, what I mean by that is it didn't really flow like a novel. It read more like a mini-series, or like it felt like episodes of a TV show, not one continuous story. Which, it's not a terrible thing, I just don't think it suited the scope of this story. For the first sort of 2/3 of the book, it wasn't clear that there was an overarching plot. It sort of just felt like, here's an episode where something fun's happening, that got resolved. Next episode, oh, we meet someone new thing is happening, cool. But you're not really sure, like, where's this going? Is there gonna be a big conclusion, or is this just a collection of short stories about these characters? Which would be fine, except that's not what it was. So maybe, I guess, the plot could have been incorporated more continuously throughout the novel so that you have a sense of, oh, this is what we're building towards, this is what's going on, instead of introducing what ended up being the main villain sort of in like the fourth last chapter or something. And the other objection I had was, so we've got our totally uninteresting main male lead. And then the other main character is Crystal, who's introduced in the first or second chapter. She's a romantic interest, female protagonist, and she works as sort of demon law enforcement, essentially. Early in the book, in small-scale situations, we see that she's super competent, she's got her shit together, but then towards the end of the book, she gets captured. We've had a couple chapters at this point in her perspective, talking about what was happening where she was, and then the other characters rescue her, and she goes off on them for like, I had it under control, it was fine, you didn't need to rescue me, which would be fine, except for the fact that we've just had 2 chapters from her perspective with absolutely no inclination that she had it under control or that she had any sort of plan. As far as the reader's concerned, she was totally captured, no way out, they rescue her, and she gets mad. There's a reveal in the final chapter that makes you go, oh, okay, yeah, she totally has it under control, I get it now. But at that point, I remember just reading it and going, you don't though. You can't just say after the fact, I have it under control, without showing during the story, if it's going to be from her perspective, that she actually has it under control. It didn't ring true. It sounded like protests, not like, hey, I know what I'm doing, don't get yourself hurt for me. So overall, it was a fun book. It was funny. I enjoyed reading it. I'll probably pick up the next, because especially given the reveal in the sort of last chapter, I want to know what happens next. I want to know where this goes. But it wasn't amazing, and I didn't think it was super well written necessarily. So the next book I read after that, very light, very vacation read, I thought, you know what, I really want to read Heads of Colored People by Nafissa Thompson-Spires, but I had a suspicion it was going to be, again, about a more serious topic, a heavier book maybe, because it says it's about the experience of being Black in the so-called post-racial world. And actually, it was much more fast-paced and easy to read than I expected. I thought that because the subject matter sounded like it was going to be pretty heavy and difficult to process emotionally, that it was going to be a hard book to read, but it was very readable and well written. It doesn't shy away from the serious topics, but it does so in a way that makes it enjoyable to read, not necessarily emotionally grueling, at least from my perspective. I talked about it a bit when I was doing my reading vlog. I liked it when I was reading it, and I like it once I've done it. If you didn't catch the reading vlog, you can click the link up above and check that out if you want. But yeah, I really like this book. I don't know why I'm surprised. Everyone's raved about it, but I guess I thought it was going to be more of an emotionally grueling book to read and to think about. And it was in ways, but also it was just very enjoyable. I don't want to get into if it's accurate or represents how people feel, because I don't feel like that's my place to say, yes, this is a good representation of things people go through, but at the same time, all of the characters felt like real people. They felt like believable, tangible people with pasts and reasons, and even the ones who objectively you don't like because they're not nice people, you totally understand them. There's no cardboard villains. Everyone in the book, I felt, seem like, yes, I can understand your motivations. I can understand what you're going through. I understand why you're acting the way you are. So that was really interesting and impressive because they're short stories. They're not, you know, novel-length explorations of one person. And in contrast to the Vampire Accountant book, where I really didn't like how serialized it was, I think this is the perfect example of where short stories can be so effective. The various stories were linked. Some stories were linked, some were standalone, if I remember correctly. But they're just so focused on character, so you don't have a plot that drives through the whole book or anything, of course. You just explore the characters, and it was perfect for that. So this was new favorite. I'm not sure if Nafissa Thompson-Spires has anything else published, but if she does, I want to go read it. And if not, I need to follow her on Goodreads to find out if she publishes anything else soon. After that, I read Guards by Terry Pratchett, which, as I mentioned in my TBR video, is a reread for me and super rewarding reread. I always loved Pratchett's writing. It was funny, it was engaging. I didn't really remember much of the plot. I sort of had vague high-level remembrance of what happened, but a lot of it was new to me. I'd forgotten how the characters that I remember from later in the Guards series were introduced, how they were when we first met them. So that was really interesting. It was just, I don't have that much to say critically about it. I liked reading it. It was fun. If you haven't read Terry Pratchett's writing, you should go read it because it's really good, and I think there's something for everyone there. But beyond that, I don't have too much to say. After that, I was in the mood for a bit more fun, so I read It Devours by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Cranor. And as I expected, Night Vale absurdity. I love it. It's so good. It's just a universe that I really enjoy reading about, and the characters and the people and the way they interact are just so satisfying. I really enjoyed the storyline of this one too. It doesn't so much end with a twist as the story keeps going, and it's not as neatly wrapped up as you think it might be partway through. There's sort of a, yeah, that would be nice in the story way to wrap this up. But everything doesn't always get wrapped up nicely. Sometimes what we think is going on isn't. And that brings us to an even more climactic, emotionally ending, at least in my view. I also think the Night Vale, our world, but not our world, is a really good setting to explore this sort of conflict between faith and science that this book gets into. Because it's not any one person's religion. It's not no one, as far as I know, unless there's some Night Vale fans that do, actually worships the smiling god. It's not a real religion. These are not real people or anything like that. So I thought that worked well in terms of looking at those differences, looking at the interaction between people who's largely driven by their faith and people who are very science focused. So on one character's side, I thought that whole thing was wrapped up very well, and that the outcome made total sense. There was sense of conclusion and wrapping up with his journey. But then the other character, I'm just not sure where it went. She has this whole adventure, things happen, and it's not totally clear at the end how it's impacted her. But at the same time, maybe that's part of the point, because in the whole, at the end of the book, some of the things are still unclear. It's not totally resolved what actually happened. And the characters themselves don't know what actually happened. So that was interesting to me, and maybe part of not totally resolving that one character's journey is necessary to have the ending where the reader is left questioning because the characters themselves don't know. Finally, I actually enjoyed the romantic subplot in this. I don't always. Sometimes I really like a romantic subplot, but sometimes I just don't find they work well. But in this situation, especially with how it ends, which I won't mention because if you haven't read the book, you should read it, and I don't want to spoil it for you. But the romantic subplot really felt tangible, felt real. It felt plausible, not fairy tale, which is gonna sound silly for a book set in a world where a mysterious glowing cloud serves on the Parent-Teacher Association, but I didn't come to this book for a fairy tale. So I liked that just as the plot wasn't fairy tale, the romance wasn't fairy tale either. And as I said, really enjoyed it. I think I've said that for most of these now, but it's true. It was a good book, highly recommend. And I'm looking forward to reading The Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Our Home. Your home. I don't know. I keep forgetting. The next book I read was Cersei by Madeline Miller, which I totally get why everyone raves about this now. It was so good and I enjoyed it so much. I really liked how these mythical personalities, these gods and demigods and all of that, Madeline Miller managed to take them, make them into people and characters that you can relate to without removing the absurdity, but also without going into soap opera, which I don't know how she manages to balance that line, but it worked for me. It really did. They were just great characters and I felt like I could understand them as individuals instead of just as strange forces working from afar. Or sometimes I feel like mythical adaptions veer too much towards the like bringing them too far down, which this definitely didn't do. I also just loved the storytelling, the pacing, everything was great. The book spans huge stretches of time because these are gods and demigods, so they live for hugely long amounts of time. But it did so in a way that didn't feel like you were just glossing over and going, ah, this happened. I'm not going to give much detail. Ah, 500 years later, this happened. Somehow Madeline Miller managed to bring a span of a story that was God-size and make it feel as if God-size was people-sized. It didn't feel like I was reading a story that stretched thousands of years, even though there's clear indications throughout the story that it is, but instead it felt like I was reading a story that spanned a person's life or part of a person's life, and I just really enjoyed it. It was so good. Can't believe it took me this long to get to it because, as I said in my TBR, I've had this book for years and I just never got around to it, which that was dumb because it was so good. Last evening of my trip, I drove home sort of just after lunch, so the 18 hours is that, before I was supposed to leave. I finished Circe and I wanted to read one more book, so I chose The Mysterious Affair of Styles by Agatha Christie because I know I can just breeze through her books so quickly. It's not a bad thing, it's just a quality of her books. And I have to say, it's hard to review an Agatha Christie book in the singular because I don't really go to her writing for the individual book. I go to it more for the whole experience. I know it's going to be a cozy mystery. I know the setting's pretty familiar. I know there's going to be a satisfying wrap up at the end. I'm not going to be on edge for 3 days while I try and figure out what's going on and who's the killer because I'm going to read it in a couple hours. So it's just, that's what I go to her books for. That being said, so far, I think I prefer Miss Marple to Poirot, but I'll probably keep reading the rest of the Poirot books because I want to keep having that Agatha Christie experience. I mentioned in my TBR that I'd heard some people found his treatment of women objectionable. Sort of get that. I expect that as I read more of his books, there'll be more examples. There was also some uncomfortable anti-Semitism from some of the characters. And obviously that's not okay now. That wasn't okay in the 1920s. But I don't remember seeing attitudes like that in the rest of her works. If I'm missing something, please let me know. So I'm gonna keep reading and see if it was sort of a one-off from these characters or if that's a theme that pervades in these books, because if it is, I don't want to read them. But I'm hoping that it's more of a, this is something someone would have said in the 1920s, even if it was not okay, unless that reflects her actual views. So we'll see, but it was a fun read. I enjoyed it. Always cozy. And that's what I like about her books. And the final book that, I didn't finish this by any means, but in my TBR I mentioned that I had How to Plan a Crusade by Christopher Tyerman put aside as my bedtime book for the week / much longer. And thanks to the abundance of fresh air, I fell asleep very easily while on vacation. So I only got about 2 chapters into the book throughout the entire week, but I liked them. They were good. Stay tuned for my July wrap up, or hopefully not August. Hopefully I'll finish this in July, but it'll be featured in a wrap up soon, and I'll let you know how I get on with the whole book and what my thoughts are once I'm more than 10% of the way in. So I hope you found those reviews / wrap ups interesting. If you've read any of these books, please let me know down in the comments. Let me know what you thought, if you agreed, if you disagreed, if you thought, hey, if you liked that book, you need to read this one. I'm really happy to hear any thoughts you have. If you liked that video, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to see more of what I'm reading in the future, please hit the subscribe button down below. And thank you for watching.